Right. Thank you very much. Thanks for everybody for joining. Wow, we've got a lovely turnout. I'm seeing about 47 people and still coming, and I'm seeing 18 people that have already introduced themselves. If you've not, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, the organization, and the position that you are holding in that organization. For those of you that have just joined in, my name is Vusi Tshabalala, a conservationist from the Kruger to Kenyan biosphere in the Lowveld, found in Hoedspruit in Limpopo. And I have the pleasure of being the host for this second Khetha webinar 2024 story project series titled Addressing Wildlife Crime, Good News from the Greater Kruger. In the first Khetha webinar, now dubbed Shades of Grey, we learned that wildlife crime is complex with no silver bullet as a solution. However, the Greater Kruger offers many stories of progress towards a safer and more secure region for both people and wildlife. Today, seasoned wildlife crime researcher, we've got Julian Rademeyer and also Sharon Haussman, who is the CEO of the Greater Kruger Environmental Protection Foundation, in short, GKEF, who are here to discuss with us some of the innovative strategies that they are having an impact on in the Greater Kruger area. So I will humbly ask our two guests to actually also be on standby, turn on the cameras, as I'll quickly be introducing them to you now. And first of all, we've got Julian Rademeyer, who is a director for East and Southern Africa at the Global Initiative Against Transitional Organized Crime. Previously, he was a project leader at Traffic, the International Wildlife Trade Monitoring Network, and editor of the fact-checking website, Africa Check, a former Investigate journalist. He is the author of the best-selling book, Killing for Profit, exposing the illegal rhino horn trade. So a very big pleasure to have you today, Julian, and looking very much forward to hearing more from you and all your experiences and some of the stuff that are probably in your book. And then second up, we've got Ms. Sharon Haussman, who is the CEO of the Greater Kruger Environmental Protection Foundation. She played an active role in the formation process of the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area and served as a vice chair of the JMC committee, which steers the governance principles for all signatories in the open Greater Kruger system. She has been a Balula Nature Reserve committee member since 2014 and served as the reserve's chairperson between 2017 and 2020. Wow, I'm really looking forward to a productive and insightful discussion. This webinar is going to begin with Julian and Sharon discussing the topic. We will then move into an open Q&A session where you are welcome to ask questions via the chat box. So please be aware that this session is recorded and it will be made available on the Giant YouTube channel if you want to watch afterwards, or you want to share with the friends that could not attend and colleagues could not attend today. This is also where you can catch up on dialogues that you have missed from the past. And now you can please continue to introduce yourself in the chat as we go on, and you can also continue to drop some of your questions that you might have in the chat and make notes of some of the stuff that our panelists would have touched on and you would like to make more follow-up on. And now I will hand over to Julian and Sharon. The floor is yours. Take it away, guys.
Thanks, Vusi. It's great to be here. Nice to see so many familiar names in the chat. And Sharon, good to be speaking to you again. I think perhaps what we should do is just begin with, for those who are not familiar with GKEF, the Greater Kruger Environmental Protection Foundation, what it is. It encompasses around 2 million hectares of unfenced wilderness, was established in 2016. Perhaps you can go into the reasons for that establishment, how it's evolved over time, and the activities that it's involved in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Julian, for that. And yes, indeed, always good to speak to you. And thank you very much to the Khetha program for this opportunity and linking one of my favorite people in this space, Julian, with myself to do this webinar today. Julian, yes, basically GKEF was formed in 2016 And it was as a direct result then of the rhino crisis that was hitting the entire Greater Kruger area. And the idea behind it was literally a unified response to what was very quickly identified as an indiscriminate threat to the entire landscape. And the landscape is very complex, so that all sounds easy and logical. However, it's an open conservation system, almost closer to 3 million hectares, about 2.7 million hectares of open, unfenced landscape, where obviously the majority of it had and still have a lot of free roaming rhino. And we have the Kruger National Park, which is by far the largest body in this open conservation system. That's a national reserve. Then we have provincial reserves, and then we have a whole series of privately owned reserves, all in an open system. So to form an organization that will facilitate a unified response was quite an ambitious task, but something that was identified and recognized by all the parties in that open system, as well as a partner that we identified in Mozambique, Garangani Reserve, which was a critical alliance and partner in this concept on the Mozambican boundary. So it was the private reserves on the western boundary, Manulete, our provincial reserve, Kruger, our national reserve, and a partner in Mozambique that all came together and said, we need to unify our response to this threat. That's how it was formed, and that's the reason. It has, obviously, over the years, it was not an easy task. Like I said, it was an ambitious concept, but we have learned many lessons. But I think over the past few years, we are in a situation where it really has become an effective organization in the landscape, and not only succeeding in that original goal, but have expanded the response strategies and, you know, the deeper understanding around all the complexities, etc.
Thanks. I mean, I guess, you know, one of the, well, not that I guess, but I think it's very difficult to overstate how bad and how difficult the challenges are facing not only reserves, but communities within the Kruger landscape. You know, you have incredibly high levels of poverty and inequality, up to 70% in some communities. You have a breakdown in governance at a local and provincial level, an absence of adequate police, you know, there's high levels of corruption, organized crime. You know, it seems to be this incredibly dark place that it's in at this stage. You know, cash and transit gangs, extortion, illegal mining, poaching, tourists who've been attacked on the way to the Kruger. So it's very easy to see, you know, to see the dark side of all of this. But what is, you know, what has GCAP been able to, you know, how have you been able to function in that environment? What role can you play? You know, there's so many external factors that are adding to the pressures that reserves face.
Thanks, Julian. Yes, it is easy to go down a negative rabbit hole, and the realities are harsh in this area. We're not going to deny that. However, and I think you know some of the people, and I think you would hear with throughout my my philosophy is people, people in the landscape. I have never met more tenacious and more dedicated people in the landscape than here, and that is ultimately what keeps us positive, what keeps us motivated, and what is making a tremendous difference in this area. And it's not only your tenacious frontline, and I'm not taking any credit away from the guys on the front line, the rangers, the wardens, all of that, but it's also landowners financially investing incredible amounts of money to secure this landscape. And then, you know, above all, I think what is really, really, what this has brought about is definitely the unity in the landscape. It's sad, but it's a reality that the crisis has really brought us together. And we have leveraged that crisis to form such a strong, big unit. But I think that is ultimately what keeps us all motivated. You know, you're not alone. There are a lot of really amazing people with incredible resilience, innovation, and there's very strong leadership. There's a very, very strong leadership in this landscape. And, you know, that's the backbone of success. And with the change in leadership recently in Kruger, how they've just picked up all the challenges and moving forward on various layers. Same on the private sector side, you know, consistent and strong leadership driving innovation, driving change. And I think it's really, the harsh reality is that our teams on the ground and our individual reserves and Kruger and the wardens, our responsibility ultimately is there to keep rhinos alive. That's where it comes down to life and death of the rhino. And that's an incredibly stressful and difficult place to be in terms of operational. It is honestly, for those who have never faced carcasses and orphans and all those absolute atrocities, that is the level where our people are operating. But we obviously, and we need to live up, and I think this area has excelled at their responsibility as custodians to keep rhinos alive. But at the same time, we all realize there's a much bigger picture to this. It's a national threat. It's an international threat. It's organized crime. It affects our people around the reserves as much as what it affects the people working inside the reserve. The rhino crimes have enabled a lot of criminal activity in the community areas. It's destabilized. I think it was a major contribution to destabilizing of safe environments in the greater landscape. So, your question is how do we act in this role? We like I've mentioned, the extensive investment, the dedication, the transparency, being honest with each other. I think that was the critical point that changed things, is when we started being honest with ourselves and honest with each other in the landscape, when we owned our mistakes, when we strive to improve on our mistakes, and when we learned from our mistakes collectively. That, for me, that has been, and that is the way that we manage to cope in this environment. Close working relationships are extremely important. We can't do this alone. You can't do this in silos, and that stretches beyond just the partners in the open system. It's together with government, together with the national departments, the provincial departments, all the relevant SAPS departments, the prosecutors, other NGOs are extremely valuable in the landscape, those close relationships. And then citizen forces, etc. It's just building those relationships and driving with intent and with positivity the change we can make as a collective. And that's how we operate in this landscape.
I mean, that's I think it's a question of unity, of bringing people together. You and I have sat in conferences and meetings for years where there's been this discussion about a lack of information. You mentioned siloing. And I guess that's, if we take anything out of this, it's that's changing. People are working together. It's a unifying element. It's also bringing together people who are facing myriad challenges in their communities.
No, absolutely. And I think as we well into the second decade, almost 2 decades of fighting this, and as much as what we need to keep rhinos alive, we also need to be very aware of the bigger challenges in the entire area and the way that this has affected communities. And, while the challenges are there, and while there are a lot of problems to address and to work through, I think there's really an increasing understanding of the greater threat and the greater landscape safety and security issues.
The Kruger Park management, and this is through meetings that I've had with them, reports produced a while back for the ENACT project. They've been refreshingly frank, in my view, about the challenge they face, most particularly, high levels of endemic corruption, demoralized staff. It's a difficult working environment. As you said, it's been almost 20 years. This is a long-running, low-level conflict, which has, quite damaging impacts on people. Is that something? Are you seeing a really, a new drive to try and tackle those challenges within Kruger?
I love this question, Julian, and thanks for asking it. And I can overwhelmingly and wholeheartedly say absolutely yes. And as I mentioned earlier, when you're honest with yourself and you're honest with your partners, that's when there's progress and growth. And the honesty and transparency and self and reflection on mistakes made, lessons learned, etc., has been an absolute changing force in Kruger, and that comes with leadership. Leadership on various levels, the Ranger Corps, the top management, right through to sandparks, etc. So I think we have we're in a really, really, really positive space in terms of Kruger National Park addressing issues that was a result of an absolute crisis that, almost broke a ranger force in the system, because we were all trying so hard to keep rhinos alive at the expense of many, many people. And also I think the change in approach, so it's not only about the animals, it's also about the people. It's been a significant, and Kruger is owning that. The work they are doing in terms of ranger wellness and the way they're going about their ranger wellness program and their integrity program, I think is absolute groundbreaking work in the world in terms of their approach. And I'm excited about what they're doing. And for the first time, maybe in a long time, the private sector can actually look at them again as a role model in terms of their ranger wellness and those. And it's the devil is always in the detail, and there are always challenges. But overall, the sharing, the transparency, the movement towards really investing in your people has been unbelievably good to see as an open system partner. We work extremely close. There are various formal meetings and networks, and it's very formalized. But I think for me, the ultimate success is the informal relationships, the honest informal relationships, that the ground level cooperation that is necessary to make the difference on the ground. That to me proves that something is really, really working here. So I think while we work very closely with them. Kruger attends all our GKF managers meetings. There's the joint management committee meetings. There are various meetings within the GLTFCA structure where we really work as one landscape and discuss challenges and support each other, etc. So we have been very involved with Kruger, and lessons learned. We're learning from them and they're learning from us. But as I said, the relationships, formal and informal, are incredible.
And the tragedy we've seen in some ways is that what's happening to try and turn Kruger around. We've seen a displacement effect in some ways with poaching, also as a result of the fact that Kruger's rhino population declined by 70%, 75% over a 10-year period. But we've seen it, and it's become a lot harder to find rhinos. We've seen that displacement effect and a push effect towards KwaZulu-Natal. Extremely high levels of poaching there. Many of the same challenges that the Greater Kruger landscape faces. Are there particular lessons that could potentially be adopted within that landscape to try and address some of those issues that they're facing?
Julian, that's a difficult question, because I think every landscape has its own unique set of challenges. But I think if I had to share lessons learned, one would be honesty. Honesty about your situation, your challenges, etc. That's number one. And number two, then collaboration, but real collaboration, not just the buzzword. Actually working with other partners and embracing help and embracing strategies, etc. So, like I say, we obviously watch the situation closely, and we completely recognize that there has been some displacement. I mean, that everybody understands that, and we're not for one moment saying that we're doing everything right or perfect on this end, and the threat could swing this way again and maybe catch us from an angle which we don't expect at this stage. So I have an immense amount of sympathy for the threat that they're under at the moment. We've been there. We know what it's like to lose 1 to 2 rhinos a day in a landscape. We know what it's like fighting multiple incursions. It is the most destructive, debilitating, negative space that one can be in. And conservation falls away because you are just surviving. So I have immense empathy for where they are, and I really, really hope there's change soon.
Yeah, GKF actually spearheaded a project some time ago to look at interventions as far as what the most effective interventions are to prevent poaching. And I think you brought together a range of stakeholders, both within the private and government sectors, to go, to discuss it, to assess the various initiatives. What were the findings of that particular, and maybe just tell us a little bit about the process.
Yeah, Julian, thank you. It was a small little idea that ended up being quite a mind fire. But we were very lucky that we initially got funding from WWF and later from Rhino Recovery Fund to actually initiate this project. And it was exactly what I was talking about, that it stemmed from one conversation that Stephen Whitfield and I had with each other in a bit of a moment of despair. It's like, it was about 4 years ago already where this idea came, the spark came. And it was, how sustainable is what we're doing? And are we really doing the best that we can with the resources that are available? So that project stemmed from that conversation. We started having conversation with Stephen obviously from Kruger Park. So it was really a project that was born in the open system. And that's where collaboration becomes real and transparency becomes real. And the support and the buy-in to that project was absolutely unbelievable. There were a few unintended consequences before we get to the results. And that was the amount of time the managers and some of the rangers and wardens spent in each other's company, the amount of lessons learned that were shared spontaneously and not in reports and formal reporting formats. But I saw people exchanging numbers for the first time who should have had each other's numbers years ago already. And so that was an unbelievable unintended consequence. A focused project like that just brought people together and got conversations flowing and information sharing. And yes, it was a very lengthy, very thorough project. We collected 5 years of data throughout the private and Kruger and MTPA reserve. And then we tried to, wanted to have a very ambitious approach in terms of marrying the actual experience on the ground and then a very robust statistical analysis to see how the two come together and do the figures and the statistics actually support the experience on the ground, or are there gaps and what works best? And it was very clear. We ended up with a lot more questions than answers. I think what was important of that it was that, and then we didn't do it for anyone else but for ourselves, to understand our landscape better and to understand how we can improve better what we're doing. So it was a very strong reflective study, and that we definitely achieved. And yeah, some of the things that came out was a little bit uncomfortable and took some people by surprise. And we had long discussions about it and explanations and different inputs. But at the end of the day, it is very clear that the dehorning in the landscape and the integrity management are the two interventions that had the biggest impact. We're not saying the others aren't important or that they didn't have an impact. The difference with those two was clear. First of all, dehorning is not a silver bullet, but it certainly gives you breathing space to get on top of everything else that you really need to be on top of. And that, I think, was the most significant difference that dehorning brought to the landscape. And then the integrity, a sound integrity system. You cannot work, not for humans or animals, work in a broken system and not know if you can trust the person next to you or in front of you or behind you. And while our statistics didn't show an immediate direct correlation between integrity and a reduction in poaching, there's not a direct, it's a longer term, it's a system change function, and it's a long-term effect. And that's, I think, why we are in the private sector where we are now, is really, really focusing on first of all, integrity. And then we've managed to get ourselves a bit of time to really explore other technologies, other interventions, and become masters at them. That was Project Fire. We are busy currently with deep dives, further studies, and some will be published by the end of March. That's going to shed a lot more light on, especially on the dehorning and the impact it's had. And then also, we have had some rhinos in the landscape poached post dehorning. So we've critically analyzed that. So we're putting together a deep dive report for end of March.
And in terms of integrity management, what would that encompass in the private sector? Because it's quite different in terms of what the private sector can implement and what state reserves could implement.
I think it's not that different, Julian. It's just whatever is in your policy that gets approved by your management structures. So it comes down to the policy that's approved. Kruger has taken a different approach to the private sector, which I'm not going to go into that detail now. The private sector, and we have been doing this, basically the first private reserve started integrity testing around 2012, 2013. And that does involve quite comprehensive polygraph testing. And, that in itself is a controversial factor. However, I think the amount of work that's been done in this space, we have really, really focused on becoming almost technical experts in terms of how you conduct these tests, how you do it, what type of questions to be asked, etc. So it is a scientific tool, but it's how it's used. So a lot of lessons learned in the landscape, and I think at this stage it is one of the most valuable tools in the toolbox of everything. Obviously, integrity goes way beyond just polygraph testing. That's where the range of wellness, your training, all of that comes in. Building an integrity sound team instead of just testing and trying to find fault. But it is a lot broader than just the testing. It did start with hardcore testing. It was necessary. Remember, we're trying to keep rhinos alive, but it has evolved to something a lot more comprehensive.
Coming back to people, GCAF has championed a range of community programs in recent years. But I think one of the biggest challenges, not only to conservation, but more broadly in terms of governance, in terms of dealing with bigger issues of organized crime and issues of inequality, poverty, and so on, is that the Kruger exists in this rapidly urbanizing landscape. I think the last census is around 2 million people. Other estimates put it as high as 4 million, possibly more people within that area. How do you implement? So what kind of programs are involved with, and how do you implement effective community programs in a place that big?
Julian, one village at a time, kind of, or one community at a time. that is impossible to have a landscape effect immediately. And as you say, it's not rural, it's a peri-urban, urbanized environment. We're talking about millions of people with, as you rightly said, massive unemployment rate. So the challenges are probably as difficult as it is in the world anyway. But at all our member reserves, GCAF member reserve, including Kruger as well, have got extensive community outreach programs. And this involves from schools, clinics, outreach programs, child development programs. There's extensive programs in the area. It is reported on as a collective, so there's a lot of communication around that. And I think there are a few different ways to look at this. There are just philanthropic, help a specific cause type of projects, which has a time and a place. There are more strategic approaches, which has a time and a place. At this stage, this landscape can almost do with all the help they can get. However, at the same time, it is critical, and that is what we're really aiming to do, is to understand the impact and also to ignite systemic change, especially in terms of the socioeconomic challenges. And while GCAF, we supported a lot of our reserve projects, and we have a community liaison officer who has close links with all the relevant stakeholders and communities in the area. The WWF USAID soccer program that we have implemented has been an absolute eye-opener, and it's become one of my favorite topics, actually. And I think the difference is that it's a positive platform by which we're engaging with community members. And you're not necessarily only engaging with community leaders and the important people, you're simply engaging with ordinary people on the ground on a positive platform. So obviously that you cannot underestimate the value of the relationships that gets built through that process. You get a much better understanding of the landscape through a process like that. I think sport, and I honestly must give the credit here to WWF of pitching that idea to us. And it made me think of it. We always had a teacher that insisted we play during school break times. And he always used to say, people that play together, stay together. And as simple as what that may sound, we're facilitating soccer matches and netball matches between the private reserves and the community members. And it has been unbelievable, the response we're getting from that, and from both sides, the communities and from the reserves and from the private landowners. So it's just a completely different and positive platform to engage in. I think it's fantastic that we've expanded this to netball to include ladies. That's been a very, very interesting learning experience for us, and certainly something that we can build on. It's not nearly as structured as existing soccer organizations in the area. But yeah, I honestly think sport can play a huge role in igniting some socioeconomic change in this landscape.
Great, that's good. It's good to hear. I'm looking forward a bit, and our time for this session is nearing an end, but looking forward, do you see, obviously, I think all of us here would accept that this is a very long struggle that's still ahead. There are so many challenges. It's had a very deep and very real impact on people. Are you hopeful that there are opportunities, meaningful advances that are being made, that can be made in future? It seems as if we're starting to move in the right direction again.
Julian, I wouldn't label myself the eternal optimist. I think I'm really, really a realist. I live here. I drive through these areas. I have been mugged. I've been robbed. I've been broken into. I've experienced firsthand how brutal it can be in the area. But it's people. And that is the opportunity, is investing in people. So honestly, there's no magic wand, but for people to understand each other better, to build better relationships, to kind of create a society with empathy, etc. I believe people can be the change, and it's every person's responsibility to pass a bit of that, whatever it is, leadership, mentorship, goodwill, opportunity, pass it on, pay it forward. Obviously, there are some serious issues that we face in terms of ineffective and corrupt law enforcement, and that is a massive challenge in this area. And we are doing a lot in that space to try and improve on that, and working closely with government, and not shying away from that challenge. And unfortunately, law enforcement is a foundation of society. You need law and order. Without that, societies fall apart. So that is probably the biggest challenge we face in this landscape. But again, the opportunities lie through people, through leadership, and through unity, just creating unity again.
Yeah, and the examples where the private sector can work together. I mean, Operation Blood Orange is a nice example, with KPMG being involved, the Hawks, Kruger, various others, GCAP, I think too. Looking at issues of corruption in the landscape and trying to address those, and there've been significant arrests stemming from that. So there are those examples. I think in some ways it's just trying to get the momentum and get the buy-in from key stakeholders. And unfortunately, many of those communities are, there's an absence of law enforcement, there's an absence of governance, and there's only so much that the private sector can really do.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is only so much. At the end of the day, law enforcement is a designated function for law enforcement officials and police and all the rest. And what we can do from the private sector is unfortunately being that nagging partner, and support them where necessary, to the point where we literally would sometimes cover critical costs. So the gaps are real, the challenges are real on the law enforcement, and on, unfortunately, we do have very slow court processes, and those are serious threats to all the good work that is happening in the area and all the positivity. I do remain hopeful that we are turning. We do engage a lot with SAPS. Capacity is a massive challenge, and the same with our prosecuting authority, etc. But from our side, we can only be a responsible supporting partner to the max, and that's what we do, and just try and build momentum. But that's we want to focus on the opportunities and not on the negatives. But in every challenge lies an opportunity, and then again, I think in terms of relationships and just goodwill of people are inherently good, and we need to really motivate through that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of commitment. There's a lot of people who are committed for the long haul, because it will be a long haul. But they're committed, they're determined. Yeah.
And with incredible funding behind it. The world wants to help this area. The world wants to have an influence in seeing less crime that affect people and the wildlife, etc. So there is fantastic funders behind these big projects, and behind most of the projects. So it's with the necessary funding, the necessary leaderships, the necessary projects, and the necessary people working together, we can turn these challenges into opportunities. If we all just sat back and said it's too much, then it was over. But there's a lot of really strong people, as you've mentioned, with really incredible projects that's changing the landscape.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm going to hand over to Vusi for questions from the audience.
Right. Thank you very much, guys, for all the insights. It has been really, really informative. What I really enjoyed as well is that there's a time Sharon indicated that they might not have everything in place and not have figured everything out, but from all the insights that you've been sharing, clearly there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of lessons that are coming out from there, and there's a lot of work that you guys have been doing. So well done, and compliments for that. I love that quote. People that play together stay together. So let's continue playing. And right now we'll go to some of the questions that have been coming through the chat. And then the first question to Sharon is, how difficult is it to counter the snaring scourge, particularly related to arrest and securing convictions?
And that's specifically related to snaring. So we didn't touch on the bushmeat and snaring issue. It is a rising challenge in this area. Obviously, we had a meeting about this just yesterday, or Monday, 2 days ago. But it is indeed, unfortunately, an emerging criminal element and crime market. And we do find that the access points are the most vulnerable areas. So that is typically, as what Julian earlier said as well, areas where governance is still not what it should be, areas that's compromised maybe in terms of resources. So, this problem creeps in those areas of vulnerability. From the private sector side, we feel the effects of it because animals move, and we end up treating a lot of snared animals. It is a topic that's getting a lot of attention at the moment from various, and again, a lot of really amazing, dedicated people like yourself as well, working in that space. And that ultimately is how we're going to get on top of it, is all of us working together and driving the change. It's a complex problem. The snaring is a very, very complex problem. It's driven by a multitude of factors. It's not an easy solution. And I think if there's one thing that we learned very clearly from the rhino crisis is, while we have to ensure those animals are safe, we also need to think of why this is happening, where it's coming from, and how do we actually address the driving factors behind the crisis.
Yeah. No, it's very true. It's very complex. But what I love about everything you've been saying the whole day today is actually the unity that is in the landscape. So at least now there's some hope and definitely some solutions that are going to come. Even seeing some of the chats and comments from the listeners and participants here. They're saying, how can we help? How can we join? So I think the family is about to get bigger from what I'm getting from today. And the second question that has been forwarded to us is, how does a focus on crime, policing, and enforcement actually interact with the focus on addressing inequality, dispossession, and weak local development governance? So in terms of budgets, in terms of the work the GCAP and protected area managers do on the ground, in terms of how PA managers or GITOC said about influencing policy. So with all the practical work that you're doing on the ground, how does it all link together?
I think we all know that there are these various white papers drafted at the moment, and we do participate in all of this. And, you know, this area has, for a long time now, already recognized that we need to pursue inclusive and broader landscape strategies and principles. And in general, very supportive of that, extremely supportive of that. You know, it's a very progressive area. People are forward thinking, and sometimes change is slow, but I think it's faster in the private sector. The change is slower in terms of getting legislation changed. And if I can bring a very practical example to that, Vusi, you know me, I'm a practical person. You know, we sit with the red line challenge, where that the western boundary of the private reserves are the demarcated red line, and that prohibits a lot of meat flow. And so they are, and those are issues that we get behind and that we work towards and engage with our community stakeholders, etc. So the inequality, you know, that is an ever persisting problem in the world, in South Africa and here. Every time I fly into Cape Town, and I think everybody that has ever flown into Cape Town, and you look at what's happening next to the N2 and the absolute, I mean, it's just the worst conditions that people are living in those shacks. And you just look on the other side of Table Mountain and you look at Camps Bay and all of that. Inequality is not a conservation problem, it's a society problem. And it should be addressed in that way.
No, very true. And you know, nothing bad towards the Cape Town people, but between you and me, I would never trade the Lowveld for anything else. And I know some people cannot leave the Cape because of the coast. So, but yeah, we actually, there's a lot of good stuff that you guys are doing here. And I think this environment, it's the place to be and the time to, and the right place to visit. Now, the other question that was forwarded, you know, with all these, you said one village at a time, and with funding, there's a lot that can be done. So what are some of the key interventions that are needed to build people and connect people? If you had funds to take things forward, what would be the key activities?
I think, Vusi, you know as well, there's a lot of really good initiatives in this area. And I think it would be very important, if anybody wants to make a difference, is to very critically look at existing programs. The Greater Kruger Strategic Development Plan, that's a program where there's a lot of opportunity. And at the end of the day, we need to ignite systemic growth and changes in terms of small business development, in terms of supply chain development, in terms of industry in the area. Those are the things that will ultimately make the difference. While it's fantastic, and some people prefer that, just to build schools or subsidize teachers, those are all important things. But I think if you really want to in it for the long term, and if you want to help this area to address some of its socioeconomic challenges, it's the entrepreneur development, the business development, the economic growth development. Those are the real issues that this area needs. And it's, again, that's not only, you know, it's not a conservation responsibility, it's a society responsibility. we are fortunate that there is such a strong conservation society in this area that can contribute hugely to that. But it's a government, society, conservation, it's all of our responsibility.
And I think just a quick follow-up to that, you've indicated that there's actually a lot of initiatives that are happening in the area, and then you also have all this, the GCAP and other platforms where you get to meet with other organizations and all that. Is there room for more people to come and join in this space to help out? If people want to help, where do they go? And I mean, you've spoken about the Greater Kruger strategic plan. If people want access to these documentations, where would be the right place to actually people engage and help from all this exciting stuff that you've actually mentioned today?
Vusi, again, I would say first step is to link with existing partners in the landscape. See if you can strengthen existing movements. There are some really, really good ones. If nothing suits you, it's a open environment. There are new initiatives, and I can give you an example. A few years ago, and I was actually there when the idea was initially pitched, the Wild Shots Outreach Program, which was something unique, didn't really fit in with a specific program in the landscape where the awareness was built and people empowered to become photojournalists and take pictures and do that. So yeah, if you have a unique skill that you want to pass on, sure, start your own initiative. But I think there are a lot of really through the GLTFCA, through GCAF, through K2C, long-standing established organizations with clear mandates in the area where you could possibly have the best effect of supporting and making a difference in the landscape.
And would you say, do you have any short anecdotes to show these informal interactions stemming from the forming of relationships?
Oh, I have many, but now I just got to be careful because it obviously involves a lot of colleagues, and we're all very careful with copy these days and all those things. But it's as simple as I'm not going to put names there, but a Kruger Ranger calling me and saying, my operations at the moment, we were under a high threat at the time. I cannot do my detection lines because I had 2 blowouts yesterday on my vehicle. Is anybody coming this way that could pick up 2 new tires in town and bring it? And we put it out on the informal group, and within an hour, someone's on the way with those 2 tires. It's just being part of a community. So that's a very basic example, but it makes a difference. That person could continue the job that day. So that's just a very simple example. There are a lot more serious things in terms of compromised people in the landscape, etc., where that gets shared a lot more freely now as well, which is important for the safety and security aspect. But like I say, it's day-to-day things that just makes everybody's life a lot easier.
Yeah. And just the last 2 questions. There's this very nice, interesting question that was put in the chat, and I'd just like to read it as it is. One must appreciate the conservation sector can exist outside the macro context where inequality and weak governance is rampant. We need to question the root problem of inequality, which is our current runaway capitalist system. In the meantime, real changes are made at the micro level by GCAP and others in the landscape. But how do we transform the whole system more broadly? These days, conservationists are expected to fill in all the gaps left by the decline of government entities. We need them to set up these states. So yeah, how do we actually go about that? Because most NGOs are doing its entities and gaps that are left by government. How should we go about this? And we end up getting multiple diverse funding to do multiple things at one go. So is this the future or the way to go to do things, or is there even better ways that we can look forward to taking that route?
Vusi, it's an excellent question. And I think a very important question. And first of all, as NGOs or as private landowners, etc., we cannot effect those changes. Government can, and we can hold government accountable for where they are failing. And we have areas in this landscape where there has been land, awarded in land claims settlements back to communities where it is not effective because of disputes and because of internal disputes and because of matters being caught up in courts. And those issues must be dealt with first and foremost so that we can experience the ripple effect of what was the intention. At this stage, it is not an example, maybe in a very small scale in the agriculture sector, but there is not an example yet where land restitution has been really successful in South Africa. And as citizens and as NGOs, what we can do is question that and push, because it's in the interest of all of us in this country for those things, for those initiatives to actually be effective and become successes, because success will breed further success. Without wanting to point fingers at institutions, and certainly not at government, they have their own challenges, but land reform in this country is failing what it's intended to do. And it's very difficult from a private sector perspective to change that. It must be, we can support it, but the change has got to come from government side.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Sharon. I think, in 30 seconds, just to wrap this up between you and Julian, with all the amazing work that you guys are doing, with all the experience, wisdom, and the knowledge that you carry, what really inspires you guys to go into conservation efforts? Like, what really makes you tick? Just you in 30 seconds and Julian, and then we'll call this a wrap.
Okay, for me, 30 seconds, apart from getting a WhatsApp this morning from one of my colleagues at GKF saying, what time are you getting to the office? The wild dogs have just killed an impala. So, those are the perks of the area that we live in and work in, and that is fantastic. But honestly, I'm a people's person. And for me, it's seeing success through people. That's my passion. I'm just very fortunate that I can live that in an environment that I love so much.
Amazing. And yourself, Julian?
I think I was drawn to it in a slightly different way, more by a morbid obsession with organized crime and strange types of crimes, which got me looking into rhino poaching. But that's evolved over time, to the joy of working in a landscape, as Sharon was saying, and also very importantly, the people, the police, the prosecutors, the conservationists, the rangers, the people that are out there every day and seeing that passion that drives them to try and make a better world, to try and improve things around them, often in incredibly difficult circumstances. So that's endlessly inspiring.
Wow, thank you very much, guys. I think that alone is inspiring, and I think you inspired me today. I'm sure if we were at a preschool and we would ask many of the kids, what do you want to become when you finish school? After this webinar, many of them would not even choose a career, but they would just say, I want to be Julian, I want to be a Sharon. So thank you very much for the great insights, and thank you very much for all the questions and all the engagements and all the comments and suggestions in the chat. You guys have been amazing. And I would just like to say a big thank you to both our speakers, just saying that all your valuable input and significant contribution to the importance of this topic. The amount of work you guys are doing is amazing. Please keep it up. A big shout out and thank you to WWF South Africa and USAID for making this opportunity available. You can find more of the Khetha project at the link in the chat. You can check, there are a lot of links that have been shared there. You can follow YouTube. You can follow on the different social media platforms. Please go and even look at previous webinars and topics that have been held, and even the upcoming ones, because this is definitely not our last one. Chapter 3 of the Khetha 2024 Story Project webinar series is scheduled to take place in April. Please, I know this is not April Fool's Day. People link April to April Fool's Day, but we are actually having our upcoming one in April. So keep an eye out for our e-newsletter and follow all the social media platforms. But it's not only just about following all the stories. To those of you that are into journalism and writing, the Khetha editorial team is our journalism story to report on wildlife crime and brother conservation challenges in the Greater Kruger area. We are looking for thought-provoking story proposals and that challenge the parochial and international perceptions of wildlife trade. The aim is to spark new narratives about wildlife trade and its broader some of the topics that are going to be covered are: how does wildlife crime affect communities? Are conservation laws helping or hindering? It's a very hot one. What are the social drivers that make problems so challenging? And the last one that I can think of or can mention, what solutions are on offer? It's not just about talking about problems, but we are looking for solutions. Some of you have even asked a question to help. Let's find solutions together. The editorial panel shall also support stories on successful conservation initiatives and projects that give voice to people in communities adjacent to Kruger National Park who have previously been excluded from discussing on wildlife crime and its social impact. So we also give voice to our local people, people that would not often find the platform or given the voice. So for those of you that have missed all the past webinars, or you'd like to listen to this webinar again, the recording will be uploaded on Jive Media YouTube channel. So please like it, follow it. Once again, thank you to all the participants and participating and giving your time. Actually, by being here, contributing to conservation, contributing to finding solutions, you're contributing to improving our landscape and our country and the continent and the world as a whole. So goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day until we meet next time.